All right, today we are diving deep into one of the most consequential stories of our time, the high-stakes, global race to build artificial general intelligence.
So what are we really talking about when we say the race for AGI? Well, it's the quest to build an AI that can learn, reason, and understand basically any task a human can, not just one specific thing. It sounds like something straight out of science fiction, right? But it's happening right now, in labs from Silicon Valley all the way to Beijing. And honestly, it's a technology that could redefine, well, everything.
At its heart, this is a story about a massive scientific breakthrough, a true miracle of human ingenuity. And this is the important part, it's really about what happens next. What happens after the miracle, how it changes science, our jobs, our ethics, maybe even how we fight wars.
So, how did this thing that only computer scientists and futurists obsessed over suddenly become this global conversation? Well, it really kicked off with a viral documentary that pulled back the curtain on a very, very private race. A film called The Thinking Game gave the world this incredibly rare look inside Google DeepMind, and it just exploded. We're talking over 100 million views, not for some superhero movie, but for a quiet, careful story about scientists chasing a dream. This wasn't just a hit, it was a huge signal that the world was finally waking up to what was being built.
But look, the insane view count wasn't even the real story. The story the film told, now that was the bombshell. It documented the exact moment AI went from being just clever software to a tool that could make profound scientific discoveries. Okay, so for decades, biology had this massive, super stubborn problem called protein folding. The simplest way to think about it is like this. Scientists knew all the ingredients that made up a protein, but for the life of them, they couldn't predict its final 3D shape. And that shape is literally everything. It determines if a protein works to unlock a new medicine or if it causes a terrible disease.
And I want to be clear, this wasn't some minor academic puzzle. This was a 50-year-long bottleneck. It held back huge progress in medicine and biology, a half-century of the world's absolute brightest minds being completely stumped.
And then, AlphaFold. Just like that, DeepMind's AI solved it. In this absolutely stunning breakthrough, a grand challenge that had baffled generations of scientists was finally cracked.
And believe me, the scientific world noticed. This was no small feat. In 2024, the team behind it was awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. This was it. This was AI's "we have arrived" moment. Proof that it could solve problems that humans simply couldn't.
This represents a total game changer. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how science itself is done. AI is no longer just a cool party trick. It's a brand new instrument of discovery, almost like the telescope or the microscope. It can speed up science and compress decades of research into just days.
So, okay, if a tool can revolutionize a science lab, the next question is pretty obvious, right? What happens when that same tool walks into the office? How does this technology reshape our entire economy and, our jobs?
Well, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, gives us a pretty staggering number to start with. In advanced economies, they estimate that about 60% of all jobs are exposed to AI. Now, that doesn't mean they're all going to disappear, but it does mean they are very, very likely to be transformed.
And this kicks off the big debate, augmentation versus automation. Is AI going to be a tool that helps us do our jobs better, faster, maybe more creatively? Or is it simply going to automate tasks and replace us? The data seems to suggest it's going to be a mix of both. But jobs with a lot of clerical work, they seem particularly vulnerable to just being automated away.
But here's the thing. Maybe the biggest risk isn't that all the jobs vanish tomorrow. It's something a little more subtle, and maybe even more dangerous. It's the idea that the career ladder itself could break at the very bottom. I mean, think about it. If AI automates all the entry-level tasks, the simple analysis, the summarizing, how do new workers ever learn the basic skills they need to climb to the next level?
With this level of disruption hitting science and the economy, you better believe governments are trying to play catch-up. They're scrambling to write the rules for a technology that's evolving at a truly unbelievable pace.
And you can see this effort kicking into high gear all over the world. There are global summits from Bletchley Park to Seoul. There's real, concrete legislation like the EU's Huge AI Act. There is this clear rush to establish some ground rules for safety, for ethics, and for international cooperation.
But this gets to the fundamental philosophical problem they all face, the real head-scratcher. Look, we know how to regulate static things, right? Like bridges or cars. But how in the world do you write lasting rules for a technology that evolves almost like a biological organism?
changing its capabilities every few months.
And that brings us to the most high-stakes arena of all, the place where all these questions about regulation and ethics become, quite literally, matters of life and death: warfare and national power.
Right now, militaries around the globe are rushing to integrate AI into their operations. They're using it for smarter intelligence analysis, for more efficient logistics, for stronger cyber defenses. But the most debated application, the one that everyone is worried about, is, of course, autonomous weapon systems.
And this leads us to the nightmare question, the one at the absolute heart of this entire debate. If an autonomous system, a drone, a turret, you name it, makes a lethal mistake and kills the wrong person, who is responsible? Who is legally and morally to blame? The programmer? The commander who deployed it? The company that built it?
It boils down to a really stark and dangerous equation. When you combine autonomy with lethal force, you create an accountability crisis. The traditional chain of command, the very thing that has defined responsibility in warfare for centuries, it just starts to break down.
So you have to wonder, if the risks are this high, why does the race just feel so unstoppable? Well, it's because the incentives, the pull, are just too powerful. We're talking about the promise of faster scientific discovery, stronger economies, a huge strategic edge in defense, and, let's be honest, pure national prestige. It becomes politically almost impossible for any nation to be the one to say, hey everyone, let's slow down.
And that brings us to what this is really all about. This whole AI boom isn't just a tech story about machines getting smarter. It's a deeply human story. It's about us, all of us, being forced to decide what it truly means to be wise with the incredible, almost unimaginable power we're creating.
Because while that race to build general intelligence is very, very real, it isn't the most important one. The true contest, the one that will actually define our future, is the race between our rapidly exploding technological capability and our much slower, much more difficult effort to cultivate the wisdom to manage it. That is the real race that lies ahead of us.